Thanks. Well, thanks for agreeing to be interviewed. Sorry
No,
about
thank you.
delays. And so first, to introduction here, this is Kenn Orphan, a writer, artist, and activist. He's had many articles in Counterpunch, Hampton Institute, Dandelion Salad, and probably other places as well. And welcome.
Thank
So
you.
first, you mentioned you had your a couple of days ago, about a week ago, your Facebook profile of 11 years was deleted. And first, my condolences. That can be a big blow, having a lot of memories and things like that on it.
Hmm.
Were you able
Yeah.
to recover some data or something from it?
No, I haven't. I actually tried a few different avenues that friends had told me about
Okay.
and had no response. I actually had one friend of mine goes way back to college days, and he contacted me and said, I know somebody who works at Facebook. So he got a hold of this person, and they said they were very sorry about my experience, and they filed a report, um, apparently, but I have not heard anything since then. Uh, I was given a whole bunch of email contacts, and I tried to send an email to them. All of them got kicked back except for one, and that was one that was entitled "Disabled" at Facebook.com.
Right.
And I sent them an email per suggestions of other friends. Sent them emails every day, making my case, including the URL link to my previous account,
Right.
uh, even an ID, which I don't really like doing because, of course, you're giving out your ID to this faceless corporation. But I thought, all right, I'll try these things. Never heard back anything. So at this point, I did check yesterday, and it appears as if the URL doesn't exist anymore either.
Right.
So I'm pretty sure that I'm not going to be getting that back.
Right. That's too bad. Now, do
Yeah.
you have? That's too bad. Do you have a backup, like not backup, a another Facebook account for your writing and your artwork, your like portfolio?
Well, I have a page that is somewhat dedicated to all of that,
Okay.
and that still exists. That's still there. I don't generally, post personal things there, but
Right.
it has all of my writings and art and things like that are thankfully they are still there.
Right.
And I had to make a new account, of course. And it's really just the personal memories, the photographs, and the things that you really don't you kind of take for granted
Yeah.
in this day and age, that you put there on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, or whatever, and you assume that it's going to be there. And if there's a problem, you kind of assume that there's some kind of recourse, some way to make an appeal. But in my case, there was none. And it said simply that it was permanently disabled, and that that the decision was irreversible. And it gave me no option whatsoever,
Right.
just basically the option to click OK, and then that was the end of it.
Right.
So I understand now, of course, that many people's accounts were disabled permanently as well. A lot of leftists, a lot of socialists. I know subsequently now reading about that. So it wasn't isolated. I wasn't, picked out of a crowd or anything of that nature. I think it was arbitrary or somewhat arbitrary algorithms that the corporation made
Right.
after what happened at the Capitol on
Right.
January 6th, and that in the sweep, it included, people like myself. And it was really, I'm convinced that it has to do with my use, just the use of a term,
Right.
not in any way promoting that term, um, but using it. just using the term, I got my account permanently disabled.
Right.
I don't see any other uh, anything else that I did that
Right.
would have caused that.
Right. You had an interesting article that appeared in Counterpunch, corporate decisions about that. Like there's no accountability. Facebook, they can do any social media. We have no control over Silicon Valley. They can do anything they want. Like I don't know anyone who regretted Trump being taken off of Twitter. But interesting thing is, they didn't take him off when, like last year, he threatened to bomb. It was 52 UNESCO culture sites in Iran to destroy
Yes.
them. That was threatening violence, and that would have been the time to take them off. But no, no, I mean, they don't want to interfere with the workings of U.S. imperialism, basically. That would have been the time. And I think another time, he didn't threaten violence exactly, but he was trying to whip up like hostility against Ilhan Omar, which is, she wasn't the first, but she was a Muslim. And some people call it like stochastic warfare. And that
Mhm.
would have been the time to possibly take him off. But, he said, my understanding, he just claimed he wasn't going to go to Bush's inauguration, like big deal. But we'll go to Biden's inauguration. Biden said he was okay with it, but that's when they took that's when they took him off. But anyway, it's been happening to lots of people on the left too.
Yes. Yeah.
It's no
Well, yeah,
accountability.
that point is very important to make. That here, in response to what Trump was doing in terms of Iran, I, in my own little way, I did this little campaign of posting all these different kinds of photographs with an explanation of all these UNESCO World Heritage Sites in
Yeah,
Iran onto my own blog, onto Facebook, onto Twitter, and just to show, well, this is what he's talking about when he's targeting these sites. And it is amazing because astonishing, really, but really not that surprising when you understand how American imperialism works.
right.
These were foreign others. These were the foreign enemy that we're supposed to be united against. So yeah, it was kind of looked at as a crass thing for him to do, but it wasn't looked at as any kind of real warmongering or real hate speech or inciting violence, which is really, really astonishing. But of course, what happened on the 6th was of course, what happened on the 6th was pretty horrible. It was terrible. I mean, it was really, a bunch of, in my view, a bunch of fascists and far right hate groups, people that were whipped up by that kind of hateful frenzy. And Trump was a major instigator of that. But the issue was that they went against the Capitol,
Yeah,
the image of the Capitol, the center of American imperialism. So
right,
that was, you just don't do that.
right.
Everything else he did, we can look the other way. 4 years
Yeah,
plus of that, we can look the other way. We're upset by it, but that's not enough to purge him.
right. The first impeachment, they didn't impeach. There's so many things they could have impeached Trump over. What he did to migrants, warmongering. So many things you could have impeached. They could have impeached him for, but no, they impeached him for some corruption in Ukraine, which the Democrats are just as much embedded in.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So
and of
you,
course it didn't work.
it didn't work. It didn't twice. It didn't even work twice. They couldn't even impeach him. And he
Yeah,
could even run again in 2024, which
yeah, I
shows you
wouldn't be
how
surprised.
absolutely incompetent the Democrats are. They're competent in what they want to do.
Hmm.
They weren't really a meaningful, like, they gave Trump his entire legislative agenda, like
Hmm.
the CARES Act, the $6 trillion bailout CARES Act, and the corporate tax cut, and the
Hmm.
renewed the Patriot Act. They really gave him pretty much legislatively everything he wanted. They fought him on these symbolic, like political theater, but they weren't
Yes.
really meaningful opposition. I think if there was like a revolutionary left, they could cut across the MAGA bullshit really easily, but there isn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Unfortunately, yeah.
yeah, so you wrote an article, very very moving article when your cat died. I believe it was
Oh,
called only Only a broken heart can expand, and you riffed on Frida Kahlo. I totally empathize. My dog Cupcake, I had a Lhasa Apso. I was really attached to. She died like December before last. She had
Oh,
seizures for a while, and then one morning before I went to bed, she was just on my bed but totally still. I knew she was gone. It
mm,
was kind of unexpected, and I felt really bad.
yeah,
So I
yeah,
totally understand. And you
yeah.
talked about grief in relation to that, which took me a while to get over. I went to a pet grief group for a time. I understand you riffed. I moved into grief over climate change. Very interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's been the topic of your writing, and doesn't look too good. Doesn't look like we're kind of screwed in some
Yeah,
ways.
yeah.
I don't know. How do you see things playing out? Do you think things will be a little different with the Biden administration, or no, or
Well, I think that I try to be very careful about, making any kind of predictions because I don't know, and I don't I think that we can make some educated guesses, and scientists certainly. There have been many scientists that have made, hypotheses about what, the likely scenarios are going to be. And I think it's getting harder to find anyone who is going to give you a really rosy picture about what's ahead. Uh, Even in the most optimistic scenarios, we are, as a species, as a society, as a civilization, where we are bound to face uh, traumatic, cataclysmic things in the not in the off distant future, but in the near future. I mean, we've seen it already in many instances. Every year is hotter than the one before it on record, and the wildfires that are getting more intense and more intractable, and drought, and instances of, I think I read, was it last week? So it was again in the Horn of Africa, locusts. Just kind of, you get these kind of biblical types of headlines, um, and so it's hard to ignore all of that. It's impossible to ignore it if you're really looking at it. That the situation is pretty grim.
hmm,
I don't subscribe to, a nihilistic or a completely apocalyptic uh, future, although I do think it's there's the potential for that.
hmm,
This is an existential crisis, and if we don't really take things seriously, then I think that um, it will become an extinction level event,
right,
much like, a nuclear holocaust, or Noam Chomsky has been talking about this a lot recently with the major threats to uh, organized human life,
yeah,
which would be, of course, a nuclear war, annihilation, essentially, or cataclysmic climate change and the subsequent ecological collapse. And I think that that's the most important thing to talk about when you're talking about climate change, because so often when you talk about climate change, it gets into an abstraction, but how it really plays out to our lives is not that it's simply just going to get hot or this or that. Those things are serious because some places will become uninhabitable due to the heat. We're already seeing this happen in different places in the world, but the ecological collapse that comes with that, um, it's like a domino effect, and so you'll see, and we're already seeing coral reefs beginning to collapse, and of course, what happens there will affect the entirety of the world's oceans, and species that live in the oceans, and species that live off of that comes from the ocean.
right,
So it's pretty dire. It's pretty dire.
right. It is. And I was wondering if you were familiar with the movie that came out, film that came out about a year ago, Planet of the Humans, Jeff Gibbs, and produced by Michael Moore, that made the rounds.
Yes.
Basically, a main topic of the movie was that we can't, like, sustainable energy sources are not really capable, unfortunately, of keeping our way of life, or really supporting what's 7 to 8 billion people in the world. Like they're
Mm,
just not, like solar. It sounds good, but it's horrifically expensive, and solar panels themselves are ecologically destructive, and so on, and
mm.
so on. So it almost points to some sort of Malthusian situation, which doesn't sound good. I was and it called out, the film was very controversial. It called out what they call it, like the mainstream, or the environmental movement says it became too corporatized. I was wondering if you had a take on that.
Yeah, I did see that film, and I think that there's some valid criticism of it, but I think it brings up very important points that don't get discussed, and they're not addressed in the mainstream. And I think that has to do with a lot of, we live on, as you know, we live under the paradigm, this is the societal paradigm of capitalism, of late capitalism. So all of our discussions um, have to be seen through that lens.
Right.
And so there is a lot of corporate greenwashing, as they say, and that has tainted all of our solutions to these existential crises, because uh, if you think that an electric car is going to save us, or this is going to save us, or that, then you're not really, grasping the enormity of the problem. And I think that the other side of that as well is to do with population. In the way that I see it, it's less to do with population and more to do with the excesses of the global north
Right.
compared to the global south, who have perhaps larger population density in certain areas, but they have a far lesser impact on the planet, uh, lesser carbon footprint, if you will, and all of those kinds of things than us in the global north, and the uses, of resources. Like if everyone in the planet were to use as much as us, who reside in the global north, we would need, I think they say, like 5 planets, 5 Earths.
Yeah. Right.
And so it has to be seen through uh, capitalism, corporatism, but also through the lens of the gross inequality between the global north and the global south.
Right. And if we had a more rational system, like U.S. agriculture is very productive, but it's also incredibly wasteful.
Hmm.
Farmers are paid not to grow certain crops, and
Yeah,
it's just insane. I mean, it's highly subsidized by the state, and just extremely wasteful. It is productive, but it's very wasteful. So we're going to have
yeah.
to, especially agriculture, think of a more productive, more less wasteful system, because it's a horrible situation we have here.
Mm.
It said in your, to change subject slightly, in your Facebook profile, it said you went to Stony Brook. I partly grew up on Long Island, eastern
Oh,
Long Island, long time ago. I haven't been back there. I'm in Maine right now. Haven't been back
yeah.
there in years. And Nick, you were apparently involved in Occupy San Diego, and now you're in Nova Scotia. How did you end up in these places?
Well, my mother is Canadian,
Okay, yeah,
and my father was he passed away a few years ago. He was a New Yorker.
okay, okay,
So I grew up in New York, and went to school, and actually went to school in Boston, then went to grad school on Long Island.
right, okay,
And then after I graduated there, I was kind of fed up with winter, and I decided I would take an opportunity to move out where my sister was living in San Diego, and that's
okay,
where I lived for many, many, many years.
okay.
And yeah, so a lot of my activism uh, was kind of spread across those 3 areas, or has been over those 3 areas.
Sure, sure. Which area did you like better, or did you connect with better, or hard to say?
It's hard to say, but I have a great affinity for all 3. But I feel like I've come home more here in Nova Scotia. This is I have a bigger connection with the land and a lot of the cultural aspects. But I'll always hold a special place in my heart for New York and for California. I mean, those were
Sure.
very instrumental in my formative years, and I met tremendously wonderful people in all of those places.
Sure.
So
Sure.
yeah, but I'm home now.
Okay, good. Yeah, yeah. I live in Maine. I spent most of my life in New England. I've been to the Maritimes, traveled around years ago. Been to Nova Scotia, Prince Edward
Mm,
Island, New Brunswick. Beautiful area.
yeah.
Culturally, it's very similar to New England, like an extension of New England. I read
Hmm.
that during the Revolutionary War, like there was a lot of sympathy originally for the U.S. colonies in Nova Scotia until an American fleet burned down Halifax, and then okay, we don't want to be part of that anymore. There was competition that changed all that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It could have been, history could have turned out a different way, but yeah, because of the continual raids
Yeah.
uh, on the coastal cities here, yeah, it had an impact on the attitude.
Right, right. That's really interesting. Yeah,
Mm.
like Canada, I always thought of Canada as like an alternate history version of the United States, like if things had gone a little differently. It's very similar, but yet sort of different in a lot of ways. Okay, well you were involved in Occupy. What do you see, like it was 10 years ago, um, and you're involved in the left now. What do you see the way ahead, if there is a way ahead, like forming an independent revolutionary party, something entirely different? And if you're here in Canada now, at least I don't know too much about the politics in Nova Scotia. You know, Canada has
Hmm.
an NDP, New Democratic Party, Social Democratic Party. But what would you
Yeah.
say about the possible way ahead for the left?
Well, I think I always try to think in an internationalist way. So I think that it's our strength comes in having solidarity with others around the world, locally and around the world, who share similar values. And those of us on the left, we can find that very easily. There's a lot of common struggles. One of the things that I think is the way forward now, because of our existential crisis with the environment and those kinds of things, has to do, I think, or it will have to do very much with the indigenous struggles that are taking place. And a lot of them are here in Nova Scotia of, indigenous peoples. Mi'kmaq is the dominant indigenous group here. And they've been at the forefront of fighting corporate appropriation and corporate destruction of their land and resources of water. And of course, you can find that when you go out west in Canada and Alberta and British Columbia, um, all different types of struggles that way. And then, of course, as you know, in the United States, all these different groups that are struggling for those fundamental rights to protect the land and the water. And it doesn't, I think it goes beyond that, which is a great thing because it connects with similar struggles that are, say, for the people of Flint or other places where the water is being purposefully or knowingly poisoned. And I think that's really how I look at it. Is there's two big struggles, and of course it all comes down to capitalism and the material needs of people that it's obviously those material needs are not being met. But as part of that is the ways that those play out are in war, the endless militarism and the military industrial complex, which of course the United States as an empire leads the world in all of that.
Right.
But it's also tremendously environmentally destructive. And then the other side of that, of course, is the corporate side, and the military arguably protects those corporate interests as they destroy the resources and ecology. And the people on the front line of all that are primarily Indigenous people. So that is really where I see our strength is in alignment and solidarity with those people, because that's where we have tremendous courage and organizing and solidarity that is going on amongst these very different groups in many cases, but it's there. Um, and as an existential crisis, I think that's the only thing that we can really look to right now.
Okay, it's interesting. Yeah, I know that Alberta tar sands pipeline, IXL pipeline was a big thing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I live in Maine, and there was like Nestle's has been buying up water rights to a lot of places, bottled water, where local towns have to pay out the nose for water rights. They just blatantly sell the water to. Is a similar thing happening in Nova Scotia or similar type?
There are some issues with some water rights. The main threat here is due to a project called Alton Gas,
Okay,
and their proposed project is actually threatens an entire riverway system, and of course the water for thousands of people. The people that are primarily affected by that, first and foremost, are the Mi'kmaq in that area.
right.
So I think there are pressures everywhere that we can that corporations and often hand in hand with either conservative or liberal governments are getting away with or trying to get away with those kinds of things.
Okay.
So it is a common struggle.
Yeah, Obama was pushing the TPP very aggressively, and apparently Trump
Hmm.
ended that, but they might have a new version of it coming back, and that doesn't
Yeah,
sound good.
yeah.
Eh,
But I'm sure they're not done with that.
Yeah, I'm sure they're not done with that. It said in your in your Facebook profile, said you worked in hospice work with ill or terminally ill people. It must be a very
Mhm.
moving experience. I was with my mom when she passed away.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I worked as a hospice social worker for many years,
Okay.
and it was difficult at times, but also very rewarding because I saw it as a privilege to be with people and families and loved ones in one of their most intimate and often traumatic points in their life. And
Right.
I met incredible people through that. I just actually did finished a conversation with one of my old colleagues and friends um, based on her experience and the pandemic. She is working still in the United States and is seeing a lot of the impact of the pandemic, of COVID deaths and burnout. So
Yeah.
we just had a great conversation, and that's up on my website about death and dying and dealing with the complicated types of issues that come with the pandemic. It
Right.
was a great, rewarding experience to work with people like her.
Right. That's great. Yeah, the pandemic has affected a lot of people. I work with special needs students, mainly students on the autism spectrum, and a
Hmm.
lot of people are really feeling it. It's like really isolated and quarantined. I mean, isn't
Yeah.
any other choice at this point, but there's, in the way, at least the way the U.S. has handled it is obviously is horrible. Not that other countries have handled it great either. How has Canada handled the pandemic? Better, worse, the same as the U.S.?
Well, I think that Canada has handled it overall better than the United States, but there are also differences when you go province to province. So Nova Scotia has actually been exceptionally lucky and also handled it in a perhaps more proactive way.
Okay.
So we here in Nova Scotia, our cases are very, very low, and we have been able to then enjoy certain things that came of that, where we weren't as isolated. Our social bubble, or whatever you want to call that, has been larger. We've been allowed to do more things
Right.
than you see in other places, and um, it's not to say that we haven't experienced loss here, but comparatively to places like Quebec or Ontario or even British Columbia, it's been significantly lower here. And so Canada is doing better than the United States, but of course,
Oh, boy.
there are other places that are doing
Yeah.
better than both of us. So yeah,
Right. Sure.
and it helps to have a healthcare system that
Yeah. You
is,
guys, national health.
yeah, that makes a big difference, I think.
Right. Right. Much people are more. Yeah. Right here we have. So you know what we have here, or what we don't have here.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's really
yeah.
interesting. So you feel there's more like social solidarity in Canada in some ways? Like people are not, you don't have an anti-masker movement or this anti-quarantine movement.
You have those elements everywhere, definitely. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of misinformation, and we live in an age, of course, with the internet, so that gets disseminated. So that you can't avoid to some extent. But for the most part here, people are very, they understand that because of public health, masks are needed. So you might have a small contingent here, especially like here in Nova Scotia, you might have a small contingent that are anti-mask, anti-vaxxer, that sort of thing. But it's very, very small compared to the United States. And there seems to be more of a community-minded ethos to protect one another than when I lived in the United States. You had a much more hyper individualistic type of culture, and that was pervasive in everything. So from the workplace to the family to mental health to physical health, all of that individualism and pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and all of those, and don't tread on me. That was much more, I remember that just being so much more a part of the culture than it is here in Canada. So that makes a difference.
Right.
It's a different ethos.
Right. That's really interesting. As I understand, Nova Scotia was at least partly settled by Scottish people, but they came over. They kept some more of the Scottish community, the clan, the Scottish clan, some of the ethos of the Scottish clan, while Scottish people who immigrated to the U.S., like especially the Carolinas, did not have that. They became more individualistic, more the American type ethos. So interesting difference. What vaccines
Yes.
in Canada?
Yeah.
Do they have the Moderna, what's the Pfizer vaccine, or are they using different vaccines? Or like Cuban, I think there's a Cuban vaccine.
Uh,
Vaccine, are they available in Canada? Or are they?
no, we haven't. Yeah, we haven't been vaccinated yet.
Okay.
They have vaccinated healthcare workers, and they're in the process of doing that. And for more vulnerable elderly populations or people that may be immunosuppressed, they're rolling that out now. I'm not sure exactly when we'll see that to the rest of the general population, but hopefully by summer.
Okay.
But as we're seeing with the uh, variants, it's going to complicate things. I think
Yeah.
we don't know exactly how that's going to pan out with
Play out. Yeah.
yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, you've been collaborated with Phil Rockstro in writing some really interesting articles. They're in Counterpunch and elsewhere. He's an interesting guy, and he's
Yeah.
sort of into Jungian psychology or depth psychology, influenced by James Hillman. And he mentions like the spiritual aspect of like climate change and things like that. Would you agree with him, or have some slight differences?
Well, I think Phil is brilliant. I've enjoyed all of our collaborations because I learned so much from him, and I gain a different insight every time. Um, like as with anyone, you don't always completely align with everything, but I think the great thing is to be able to learn something especially learn something about yourself. And I've always gained that from Phil's insights. And I do I think that's what made our conversation so fruitful and interesting, was because we both share that similarity of seeing our crisis, our existential crisis of ecological collapse, and the crisis of late capitalism in all of this, in through a spiritual lens, and that's indispensable. And you know, we there's so many things when we talk about spirituality. It's often a loaded term, and it comes weighted down with all sorts of various interpretations of what that means. But I think that what we try to do is really talk about in philosophical terms, and then also in the realm of poetry and art, and that I think helps to put focus on things in a way that is more accessible for more of us,
Right.
and not in some sort of a narrow spiritual or philosophical school.
Right. Your art, poetry, music can transmit spiritual advice or
Yes.
insight. That's really interesting. How did you meet Phil Rockstro? How did you begin your collaboration with him?
Well, we actually is online. Yeah, I don't even remember exactly when, but it was many many years ago, and I was taken with his writing, and I also had seen then some of his writing in Counterpunch, and we just started discussing.
Yeah.
He had seen some of my work, and we realized that a lot of it aligned, that we connected on a level that we saw the world in similar terms, and and that helped. That helped. Yeah, he's a tremendously brilliant brilliant man.
He's an interesting guy. I love reading his stuff. He's an
Yeah.
interesting guy. Yeah. Now, what's the situation like for LGBT rights in Nova Scotia and Canada as a whole? Like, I'm trans. Would people or trans people accepted in Canada or not as much, or it depends?
Yes. Well, I find that it's far more accepted here than when I lived in the States. Um, I identify myself as queer, so I've never run into any problems or any conflicts with anyone about that. And I know that the there's the culture and the government, which are both very, very encouraging and not just tolerant, but also uplifting of LGBTQ community. And it's not to say that there isn't homophobia or transphobia here. There is everywhere, but it's not looked at favorably. If you hold those views, you would probably want to keep them to yourself, because it's just not looked at. So it is a much more positive type of cultural atmosphere here than I ever found in the United States.
Okay, that's
And
good.
even in the LGBT community down in the United States, I often found that there were schisms between the various groups that I don't find as much here.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, I'm encouraged. Of course, it's a struggle everywhere.
Yeah. Sure.
There's reactionary attitudes and forces that we have to battle against, but in our struggle for liberation. But I think that it feels more comfortable here to be out and um, vocal about that and visible about that than it did in the United States, and certainly in some parts of the United States. Now, of course, here in Canada, it probably would differ if I were to be speaking from some area of maybe Saskatchewan or Manitoba or Alberta, where it's maybe more conservative. But in the larger population areas, and of course on the East Coast, it's pretty much very, very tolerant and progressive in that way.
Cool, cool. It's interesting. People say Alberta is like the Canadian version of Texas in some ways. I got that impression, but it varies a lot. It,
Yeah, there's you can say that in a lot of ways, just especially there's the more concrete ways, of course, with the fossil fuels and the impact of that kind of economy on wealth. Albertans, have seen a lot of wealth from fossil fuels, but it's also quite conservative.
right.
And yeah, you'll see a number of far right uh, attitudes in even groups. I mean, Canada has its own far right extremist groups here. Proud Boys was just recently designated terrorists here in Canada, but
Yeah, the Proud Boys in Canada.
they
Yeah.
yeah, that just recently they recently got that designation here because of we see what's happening in the States, I guess,
Yeah, it's
and
interesting.
that the Proud Boys were very vocal, very out there during the Trump years, and they have a contingency here. I think that I maybe I'm wrong about this, but Gavin McInnes was the founder, and I think he was Canadian.
Yeah,
So
He
yeah,
was an editor, founder of Vice magazine originally, which is sort of left wing, but he left them. Yeah. And
yeah,
one of the leaders of the Proud Boys was recently outed as an FBI agent.
yeah.
They're pretty riddled with the feds. That's really interesting. Yeah, people say Canada is like they imitate the United States like a couple of years later, like JFK was president in
Hmm.
1860. Then Canada had Pierre Trudeau. Only they kept him for 20 years. We had U.S. had Reagan. Canada had Brian Mulroney, whatever. Now, sort of
Hmm.
imitate what the U.S. does just a couple of years later. Have an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, well, and Trudeau,
Trudeau, yeah,
Justin Trudeau, after Obama.
right,
So
right. He's yeah, right, right. So
hopefully we won't go as far as Trump, but
right, he's
anything
got
can
our back.
happen.
Yeah,
Anything can
right.
happen. I mean, you have to look at Canada in the same vein as any settler colonial society. We were founded essentially the same way,
Right.
of European settlers coming over and ethnically cleansing the land and of the indigenous population, much like the United States or Mexico or Brazil. And Canada's, we are much more closely aligned, at least in the way that the society runs, much more closely aligned to, say, Western Europe.
Okay.
But then a lot of the other attitudes, the other side of that, borrows a lot from the United States. So yeah.
That's a mixture. Right. It's interesting.
Yes, makes it interesting.
Yeah. Now you had some your artwork, your paintings on your blog, which is really fascinating. Have you exhibited in Nova Scotia or in the U.S.?
No, not Nova Scotia, not yet.
Okay.
I'm hoping to perhaps this summer. I was going to do an exhibition with a local artist friend here, but now the pandemic has kind of stalled that, and along with a lot of other things. But hopefully, I'll do that. I exhibited more in the United States and then here.
Okay. What drew you to painting?
I'm sorry.
Oh, what drew you to what made you interested in painting?
In painting,
Yeah.
well, I was always interested in art
Okay.
when I was a kid, and I just couldn't stop drawing, um, and it grew. It was a way to express myself. I think also it helped in channeling, the feelings that I had before I came out, and then after I came out, it became a fuller expression of that.
Okay.
And also the way that I kind of see the world, because I kind of see vivid colors, and I never realized that that's what I was seeing until it was pointed out to me, and because I thought everybody saw the world that
Yeah.
way. So my paintings are often in vivid colors, but
Okay.
that's because that's how I see the world, and it was a way to kind of show people that. Same with my photography of what I see.
Yeah. Some of your photos are just gorgeous.
Well,
Photos.
thank you.
It's just really gorgeous. Is that one of your photos on the side there? Look like
Oh, this one. This is a
yeah.
painting.
Okay, but it's a
Um,
painting. You couldn't really see with the resolution. Oh, it's beautiful.
yeah, thank you.
Because
Thank
it,
you.
it
That's I did that several years ago.
okay.
It's one of the bays up here.
Is that the
It's
Bay
called
of
Mahone
Fundy?
Bay.
Okay. Oh, okay. I see. I see. Yeah,
Yeah,
I've been to Nova Scotia years ago. Really beautiful. But yeah, really, really beautiful artwork. Really
thank you.
beautiful. Okay. Well. Let's see. Can't. I know there's some on your blog. You had films. Are they your films or someone else's?
No, no, they're just films that I found interesting, or
Okay.
that they had like some information that I thought people would be interested in or find interesting. It's usually to do with the environment or with some sort of thing that I see as an injustice that you to educate people, raise awareness about. And then there's some things about spirituality. Nothing, my spirituality, I think of pretty personal and intimate, so I would never impose that on anyone else. But I think that there are some things that are universal, like in art and our experience of grief and connection with one another.
Right.
So yeah, that's all that is.
That's interesting. Just one more question in terms of spirituality. Um, how do you see this connecting with activism or social change? Like, I'm a Marxist, but I also have a spiritual side, and
Hmm.
I'm trying to reconcile those two. Like, Marxism is a materialist, and I am like a materialist, but I
Yeah,
also I have a spiritual side, and I'm myself kind of struggling how to combine these two, if it's possible. Like I'm kind of
yeah.
been interested in Buddhism and I on and off meditate, but I'm not very good at it. And years ago, I have done a share of hallucinogenic drugs, while
Mm.
many moons ago. But and I'm trying
Yeah.
to reconcile these different worldviews, if it's possible. Maybe it's not even possible. So, wondering what your take on that might be.
Well, I can commiserate with that. It's often hard to do that sometimes in certain leftist circles because it's that's not really the focus, and certainly everybody has a different something different to bring to the table. Um, but I've encountered more and more people who are consider themselves leftists or Marxists or socialists, anarchists, who also have a spiritual aspect of their lives, and it's a big part of their lives, but that they, they're not as confident to discuss it. But now I've met them, and we're talking more and more about it, and I don't know if you can fully reconcile it, but I know that my activism is rooted in the belief that we are we're here. We add meaning to our lives,
Right.
um, and that meaning comes through connection with one another, with the desire for the well-being of not only yourself but for others. That kind of altruism. And you don't necessarily have to have a spiritual or religious belief to believe in altruism, of course. I mean, that's could be seen as an evolutionary function. Excuse me, but I think that there are values that people get through their spirituality, and for me, the values that I get are the notion of transcendence, that there's things that I live in a universe bigger than myself, and that I won't ever understand um, everything about it and these grand mysteries, and to stand in a place of awe and wonder at that. So it's kind of different from a sense of religious dogma that would try to explain everything, but more in standing in awe and silence and just astonishment at what the universe is, at what my life is. Uh, and that's expressed, of course, in art and music and poetry and uh, cuisine, everything that is part of human culture, I think stems out of that that sense of awe about where we are, the sense of wonder,
Right.
and that's where my spirituality really is. I for a while, for a long time, I kind of gravitated towards Quakerism,
Okay.
and that just that understanding of the spark, the divine spark that is in each of us,
Right.
and kind of sitting quietly with that and allowing that to just come spontaneously out by itself. Um, and that's still a big part of my spirituality. But I think it's caring for the well-being of others, and um, seeing yourself in others as well. So that I probably not doing a good job at reconciling or explaining it, but
No,
that's
makes sense.
that's the dialogue that I have with myself,
Sure.
essentially,
Sure.
about my spirituality.
Sure, interesting. Yeah, I've been to a Quaker meeting a bunch of times over the years. Man, they wait for the light of God to enter them. They sit still. Yeah,
Yeah,
beautiful
yeah.
stuff. Very interesting. Okay. Well, I can't. Is there anything else you'd like to mention? Can't think of anything else.
Yeah, no, this has been a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks. I'm glad you did, and I appreciate you spending your time.
It's
Spending
great to
time.
connect with you.
Okay, thank you. And I hope you got your car out. Your car was stuck the other day.
Oh, yeah.
That's happened to me so many times. I live in Maine. It's happened to me last winter a few times, but
Well, I was very lucky. There's no way that I could have gotten it out on my own, but thank goodness for a person who owns a tractor
right.
and had the chains and everything, and was able to do that. And yeah, very grateful for that.
That's
But
good.
yeah, it's amazing how you can just slip just a little bit off the road and you're stuck.
Yeah, I know. I know. It's happened to me a bunch of times. Yeah. Do you guys have a lot of snow where you are?
We a lot of it is melted. We had it a lot the other day,
Right.
but it gets that kind of icy, really compact, and that makes it kind of hard to drive on. But I guess we're getting a big storm tomorrow, and a lot of the North America has seen some bad weather. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm not looking forward to it here. Yeah.
no, I'm ready for spring.
Me too. Me too. 2 more months. Yeah. Okay. Well,
Yeah,
thank you. Thank you.
thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.